night was supposed to be silent, empty, but some places never truly were. Ryan was a third-year college student, majoring in architecture. He was logical, skeptical. He didn't believe in ghost stories. He had heard all the rumors about the old humanities building, the strange whispers, the lights that flickered on their own, the eerie knocking sound students claimed to hear in the dead of night. But he never believed them, until the night he found himself trapped. It was finals week, and the library was a nightmare, packed with students hunched over textbooks, whispering notes to each other, stress thick in the air. Ryan hated distractions, so he needed somewhere quieter, somewhere isolated. He remembered the old humanities building. The third floor had been mostly abandoned for years. No one ever went up there at night, not after the stories. But Ryan wasn't afraid. It was just an empty classroom. At 11:45 p.m., he climbed the stairs, each step echoing loudly in the desolate hallway. The air felt different, stale, cold. He brushed it off. The door to room 306 was unlocked. Just as he had hoped, he flicked on the lights. A faint buzz filled the air as the old fluorescent tube struggled to stay lit. The classroom smelled of dust and forgotten history. Rows of empty chairs stretched before him, their wooden legs screeching softly as he pulled one out. Ryan sat down and opened his notebook. The ticking of the old classroom clock was the only sound in the room. The silence felt oddly comforting. Then, just before midnight, he heard it. A knock. Faint. Slow. A rhythmic tapping against the lockers outside. Ryan's head snapped up. He frowned. The knocking continued. A steady pattern, growing louder. Knock. 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 He stood up, heart pounding slightly. Was someone else here? He walked toward the door, pressing his ear against it. Silence. Ryan exhaled, shaking his head. Probably a janitor, or maybe some students messing around. He turned back to his seat. Slam. The classroom door shut. Not just shut, locked. Ryan jumped. His breath hitched as he rushed toward the door, twisting the handle. It wouldn't budge. His pulse quickened. Hello? His voice wavered. Is someone out there? No answer. He twisted the handle harder. Still locked. He pulled out his phone, fingers shaking slightly. No signal. The screen flickered, then went black. Something felt wrong. A gust of cold air swept through the room, carrying a whisper. Not from the hallway, from inside the classroom. Ryan spun around, his back pressed against the door. His breathing grew shallow. The lights flickered violently. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. Then, the whispers grew louder. Multiple voices, too many to count. Murmuring, chanting. Low, guttural sounds that made his skin crawl. The chairs in the room trembled slightly, like something unseen was moving past them. Ryan's stomach twisted. He clenched his fists. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. A soft scraping noise made him freeze. A chair in the far corner moved. Not tipped over, not dragged by the wind. It slid on its own. Ryan's breathing turned ragged. He backed up against the door, his fingers still gripping the handle. Then, from the front of the room, the blackboard screeched as words began appearing. Get out. His heart nearly stopped. No, this is a prank, he whispered. But deep down he knew. Something was here, and it wanted him gone. Then, the lights cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. Ryan could hear his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. The whispers grew closer. Then, footsteps. Soft, bare, coming from the center of the room. Ryan's chest tightened. He wasn't alone. The footsteps grew closer, closer, right in front of him. Then, the air turned ice cold. Ryan's breath hitched as a shadow moved in the darkness. Not his. Something tall, unnaturally thin. It stood inches away, watching. Then it spoke, a voice, low and distorted, seeping into his ears like a whisper through cracked glass. You shouldn't have come. Ryan's knees nearly buckled. He pounded on the door. Let me out. The whispers laughed, distorted, mocking. The air felt thick, pressing against him. Then, something cold brushed against his arm. Ryan choked back a scream, his body trembling. And then, the door creaked open. The pressure vanished. The whispers stopped. Ryan stumbled forward into the hallway. Empty. The lights outside flickered normally. The cold air was gone. Everything seemed normal. He turned back to room 306. The door stood slightly open, revealing only darkness inside. His hands shook as he sprinted down the hall, never looking back. The next morning, Ryan asked the janitor about room 306. The old man's face darkened. "Room 306, he asked, his voice low. "That room's been locked for years." Ryan's blood ran cold. "No, I was there last night. I was studying." The janitor shook his head. "Impossible. That room was sealed off after a student went missing inside." Ryan's breath hitched. "Missing?" The janitor nodded grimly. "They found his books, his bag, but never him. Some say he's still in there." He sighed. "Whatever you do, kid, don't go back." Ryan never stepped foot in that building again. But students still whisper about room 306. Some say, if you listen closely at midnight, you can still hear the knocking. Some say, if you pass by the room, you'll see shadows moving inside. And some say if you stay too long, the door locks itself. And this time, it won't open. The lecture hall was massive. Rows upon rows of seats stretching toward the back, dim overhead lights casting long shadows across the walls. During the day, it was packed with students, but at night, it was a different place entirely. No one liked staying late in Lecture Hall 7. There were rumors, whispers of something lurking in the shadows. Some said they had seen a figure standing at the back, watching, but whenever they looked again, it was gone. Alex never believed in ghost stories. He was a computer science major, rational, logical. Ghosts didn't exist, just tricks of the mind, figments of overactive imagination. That was before he saw it. The night it began, it was a Friday night, around 11 p.m. The campus was nearly empty, most students gone for the weekend. Alex had an important exam on Monday, and his dorm was too noisy for studying. He needed silence. That's when he thought about Lecture Hall 7, completely deserted, away from distractions. He made his way there, pushing open the heavy doors. The air inside was stale, oddly cold. The silence was overwhelming, like the walls themselves were listening. Shrugging off the unease, Alex chose a seat near the middle, placing his books on the desk. He flipped open his laptop, the soft glow of the screen illuminating the empty room. For the first hour, everything was fine. Then he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. His eyes flickered to the back rows. Empty. He shook his head. "It's just in my head." He returned to his notes, but the feeling didn't leave. Then he noticed something on his laptop screen. The reflection, a shadowy figure, tall, hunched, standing at the top row of seats behind him. His stomach twisted, his breath caught in his throat. He spun around. Nothing, just rows of empty chairs stretching into the darkness. Alex's pulse pounded in his ears. He took a deep breath. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe he was exhausted. He tried to focus again. The first sound, tap, a soft noise echoed through the hall. Alex's fingers froze over his keyboard. He listened. Silence. Then, tap, 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 from the back of the hall. Slow, deliberate. Alex swallowed hard. His eyes darted up again. Still nothing. He forced a laugh, trying to shake off the chill crawling up his spine. "I'm just tired," he whispered. But then, a chair creaked. His body stiffened. His head snapped toward the far right row. One of the seats was slowly rocking. Alex's breath hitched. The seat hadn't been moving before. Then, the lights flickered. Not a normal flicker. A pulse. A slow, deliberate dimming, plunging the hall into shadow before humming back to life. That's when he saw it. A dark figure, just barely visible in the dim light, standing in the aisle. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. The chase begins. Alex shot up from his seat, knocking over his coffee. His chest tightened, his instincts screaming at him to run. He blinked. The figure was gone. His breathing was erratic now. His hands were clammy. He wasn't imagining this. Then, thud. A seat in the back row slammed shut. Thud. Another. Closer. Thud. Row by row, the seats began closing on their own, as if something unseen was descending the stairs toward him. Alex's blood turned to ice. He grabbed his backpack, bolting toward the exit. His footsteps echoed, merging with the relentless thud, thud, thud of the seats closing behind him. The doors were only a few feet away. Then, the lights cut out. Complete darkness. His breath came in short gasps. Then a whisper, right behind him. "Don't leave." Alex screamed, blindly fumbling for the door handle. His fingers found cold metal. He yanked it. Locked. His stomach twisted. He banged on the door. "Let me out." The whisper came again, closer. "Stay with me." A cold hand grasped his shoulder. Alex wheeled around, his scream caught in his throat. In the faint emergency glow of the exit sign, he saw it. A twisted, elongated shadow stretching toward him, its face hollow, its eyes deep black voids. It didn't move like a person. It shimmered, its limbs bending unnaturally, its body flickering between solid and shadow. Then it smiled, a slow, nightmarish grin. Alex's vision blurred with terror. He slammed his body against the door. Then a hand shot out from the darkness, grasping his wrist. It pulled hard. Alex screamed as something yanked him backward. The air turned suffocatingly cold. His vision dimmed. He felt himself being dragged into the darkness. The escape? Then the door burst open. Light flooded the hall. The pressure vanished. Alex tumbled forward, hitting the cold tiled floor outside. Panting, shaking, he scrambled to his feet and looked back. The lecture hall was normal. Lights on, desks in place, completely empty. The shadow was gone. The door, which had been locked just moments ago, now stood wide open. The aftermath. Alex never stepped foot in Lecture Hall 7 again. He told no one. Who would believe him? But sometimes, passing by that hall at night, he'd see something in the reflection of the glass doors. A dark figure standing at the back, watching, waiting. And late at night, when the campus was quiet, some students still hear the faint thud of chairs closing one by one, as if something is still there, waiting for someone who stays too long. It started as a joke. Students at Blackwood University loved to share ghost stories about the old library. They whispered about the strange noises, the flickering lights, and the books that sometimes moved on their own. But no one took it seriously, until Lena did. She was a literature student, always buried in her books, always pushing deadlines. She needed absolute silence to focus, which is why she often studied in the library long after everyone else had left. That night, she was alone, or at least, she thought she was. The grand library of Blackwood was massive, tall shelves stretching to the ceiling, rows of wooden desks bathed in the soft glow of green-shaded lamps. The scent of old books filled the air, mixed with the faint mustiness of dust and time. Lena sat near the back corner, where no one would disturb her. Her textbooks were open, highlighters scattered around, coffee growing cold beside her. Everything was normal, until she heard it. A whisper, soft, faint, indistinct. She froze, her pen hovering over the page. She turned her head slightly, listening. Silence. Shaking it off, she continued reading. But then, another whisper, this time clearer, closer. A voice. Lena. Her blood ran cold. Her head snapped up, eyes scanning the empty library. No one. Her breath came out in a shaky exhale. I'm imagining things. She rubbed her temples and forced herself to focus. But as her eyes skimmed the page, the words changed. The printed text shifted, rearranging itself, forming something new. A single sentence. Look behind you. Lena's breath hitched. Her fingers trembled. Slowly, so slowly, she turned her head. Nothing. Just the endless rows of bookshelves stretching into the dimly lit library. She let out a nervous laugh, rubbing her arms. Maybe she was just overtired. Maybe her brain was playing tricks on her. She slammed the book shut and reached for another. But the moment she flipped it open, more whispers, more voices, and this time they were coming from the books themselves. The whispers surrounded her, seeping from the shelves, echoing between the aisles. She could hear multiple voices now, some soft and pleading, others harsh and demanding. Help us. Read more. Don't leave. Lena's heart pounded. She stumbled to her feet, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. The whispers grew louder. Pages flipped on their own in the books around her, papers rustling in a phantom wind. One book fell from a shelf, landing at her feet. The title sent ice through her veins. Lena's Fate. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The pages were blank, except for the very last one. A single sentence. Run. Her stomach dropped. Then, the lights flickered. A loud thump echoed through the library, like a heavy book slamming shut. The air turned ice cold. Lena's breath came in fast, panicked gasps. Her instincts screamed at her to get out. She turned toward the exit, and the bookshelves moved. With a sickening groan, the massive wooden shelves shifted, blocking the path. Her way out was gone. The whispers turned to laughter, mocking, taunting. A book flew from the shelf, narrowly missing her head. Then another, and another. She ducked, shielding herself as books rained down around her, their pages flapping like wings. The voices grew deafening. Then silence. Total, suffocating silence. Lena peeked between her fingers. The books had stopped moving. The library was still again, but something was different. The air was too still. The lamps above her flickered once, then dimmed, casting the room in eerie shadows. Then she saw it, a figure, standing in the far aisle, tall, shadowed, featureless, watching her, not moving, not breathing, just there. Her chest tightened. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, but she couldn't. She was frozen. Then it moved. The figure glided forward, not walking, not touching the ground, just drifting closer. The bookshelves trembled as it passed, the whispers returning in a frenzy. Lena took a shaky step back, her foot hitting a fallen book. She barely caught herself. The figure was closer now. Lena's breath hitched. Her vision blurred with panic. She needed to do something. Then she remembered the book in her hand, Lena's fate, heart hammering. She flipped to the last page again. The words had changed. Say our names. Her hand shook. What did that mean? The whispers grew urgent, desperate. Lena's eyes darted to the spines of the books around her. And then she understood. The books weren't just books. They were people, trapped souls. She had to free them. With a deep breath, she read the names aloud, one by one, from the surrounding book spines. Eleanor, Henry, Abigail, Thomas. The figure screamed, a guttural, ear-piercing wail that shook the entire library. The lights exploded, plunging the room into darkness. The bookshelves trembled violently, books flying in every direction. And then, silence. Lena gasped for breath, collapsing to her knees. The air was warm again. The library was still. The books lay scattered, lifeless. And the shadow, gone. Lena never spoke of that night. She never stayed in the library past sunset again. But sometimes, when she walked past those shelves, she swore she could hear it. A faint, almost grateful whisper. Thank you. And late at night, when students study alone, some say they still hear it too. The soft rustling of pages turning on their own, as if the books are still alive, still waiting for the next name to be written.